They say at -71 degrees, your breath turns to ice before it leaves your lips. But in the frozen heart of Yakutia, the cold isn't the only thing that hunts you. When a massive Siberian tigress blocked Galina's cabin door, she thought she was dead. She was wrong. The beast didn't want blood. She wanted a savior. The thermometer on the exterior log wall had long since stopped making sense. It was an old mercury stick, crusted over with rime, but Galina Petrovna didn't need a gauge to know that the air outside had turned into poison. It was the kind of cold that didn't just bite. It snapped bones. The locals in Oymyakon called it the White Death. But out here, 20 miles past the last settlement of Tomtor, Galina just called it Tuesday. She was 74, a widow with hands like gnarled oak roots and a spine that refused to bend, even under the weight of the Siberian winter. Her husband, Victor, had died 6 years ago, taken not by the cold, but by a heart attack while splitting logs. Now, it was just Galina and Buran, a massive Caucasian shepherd mix who usually feared nothing, currently whimpering under the cast-iron stove. "Hush now, old fool," Galina muttered, adjusting the wool shawl wrapped 3 times around her head. The cabin was a fortress of moss-caulked timber, but the frost was insidious. It crept along the floorboards, painting white ferns on the inside of the windows. Galina pulled on her reindeer hide boots, the torbasa, and grabbed her heavy mittens. The woodpile was running low. In Yakutia, running out of wood wasn't an inconvenience. It was a suicide note. She picked up Victor's old double-barreled TOZ 3-4 shotgun. She rarely loaded it, mostly using it to scare off hungry wolves. But today the air felt heavy, charged with a static that made the hair on her arms stand up beneath her layers of wool. Pushing open the heavy door required a shoulder check. The air hit her like a physical blow, instantly freezing the moisture in her nose. It was the twilight of the polar day, a bruised purple sky hovering over an ocean of white. The silence was absolute. No birds. No wind. Just the terrifying stillness of a world frozen in time. Galina trudged toward the woodshed, the snow screaming like styrofoam under her boots. She worked quickly, her breath billowing in thick, crystalline clouds that lingered in the stagnant air. She threw the logs onto the sled, her rhythm mechanical. Chop, stack, breathe, snap. It wasn't the sound of a tree splitting from the frost, a sound like a gunshot that echoed through the taiga constantly. This was the wet, heavy crunch of snow compressing under immense weight. Galina froze. She was 10 feet from her door. Her shotgun was leaning against the chopping block, 3 steps away. Slowly, she turned. Standing at the edge of the clearing, where the black pine forest dissolved into the gray expanse of her yard, was a monster. It wasn't a wolf. It was far too broad, its shoulders rippling with muscle beneath a thick, tawny coat dusted with frost. It was an Amur tiger. Galina's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Tigers were ghosts, myths that belonged further south in Primorsky Krai. To see one here, this far north in the dead of winter, was impossible. It was a phantom, but the steam rising from its jaws was real. The beast was colossal, easily 600 pounds, its orange and black stripes stark against the snow. But it looked wrong. It stood with a strange posture, favoring its left side. Its head hung low. Galina's hand twitched toward the axe in the log. "Don't run," Victor's voice echoed in her memory. "Run, and your prey." Buran, usually the first to defend their territory, was silent inside the cabin. He knew. The tiger took a step forward. Galina stopped breathing. The golden eyes, burning with an intelligence that terrified her, locked onto hers. It didn't crouch. It didn't bare its teeth or flatten its ears. It just watched. "Go away," Galina whispered, the sound swallowed instantly by the cold. "I have nothing for you." The tiger let out a sound that wasn't a roar. It was a chuff, a low, resonant exhalation that vibrated in Galina's chest. It turned its massive head, looking back toward the dense tree line, then looked back at Galina. It took another step, not toward her, but sideways. It paused, looking back at the trees again. then fixed its gaze on the old woman. Galina frowned. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but curiosity was beginning to fray the edges of her panic. She had lived in the taiga all her life. She knew predators. A hunting tiger focuses on the kill. This tiger was focused on something else. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice louder this time. The tiger whined. It was a high, incongruous sound coming from such a lethal creature. It turned fully, walking a few paces toward the forest, then stopped and looked back over its shoulder. It was waiting for her, common sense screaming at her to go inside, bolt the door, and stoke the fire until the world melted away. Following a tiger into the taiga at -71 degrees Celsius was not bravery, it was madness. But Galina Petrovna had not survived 70 years in the harshest place on earth by ignoring her instincts. And her gut was telling her something impossible. She is a mother. And she is begging. "God help me," Galina muttered. She grabbed the shotgun, breaking the breech to check the shells. 2 slugs. She pocketed 3 more from her coat. She whistled for Buran. But the dog refused to come out. "Fine. Stay there, coward." She secured her scarf, pulling it up to her goggles, and stepped away from the safety of the cabin. The tiger watched her come. As Galina advanced, the beast maintained a distance of about 50 yards, moving with a fluid, silent grace that belied its size. Every few minutes, it would stop and look back, its tail twitching anxiously. They walked for 20 minutes. The cold was beginning to penetrate Galina's layers. Her toes were numb, a dangerous sign. If they went much further, she wouldn't make it back. The landscape here was treacherous, hidden ravines filled with soft snow that could swallow a person whole, sharp ridges of ice that could slice through boots. The tiger led her toward Devil's Thumb, a jagged rock formation that jutted out of the taiga like a broken tooth. It was a place Victor had always avoided. The winds swirled there, creating unstable snowdrifts. The tiger stopped abruptly at the base of a steep incline. It began to pace, clawing at the ground, letting out those low, distressing chuffs. Galina stopped, panting, her breath freezing on her scarf. "What is it?" she wheezed. She crested the small rise, the shotgun held ready across her chest. The tiger moved aside, allowing her to pass, a behavior so unnatural it made Galina dizzy. She looked down. There, at the bottom of a narrow, sheer-sided fissure in the rock, was a ball of fluff. It was a cub, no older than 4 months. It had evidently tried to follow its mother up the icy rocks and slipped, tumbling down into a deep, bowl-like depression. The walls were slick ice. Every time the cub tried to climb out, it slid back down, exhausting itself. It wasn't moving. The mother tiger looked at Galina, then at the cub, then back at Galina. She let out a sharp, piercing cry. Galina stared at the cub. It was half buried in drift snow. At these temperatures, a small body loses heat rapidly. It was likely already dead. "I can't go down there," Galina told the tiger, her voice shaking. "I can't climb out." The mother paced closer, her massive head lowering until she was eye level with Galina. Galina could smell the musk of the animal, the scent of pine and old blood. The tiger nudged Galina's elbow with her wet nose. It was a gentle push. "Help him." Galina looked at the fissure. It was about 8 feet deep. She looked at the mother tiger, a killing machine capable of snapping her neck with a single swipe. And then she looked at the small, motionless ball of fur. "Victor would kill me for this," she whispered. She slung the shotgun over her back. She uncoiled the rope she always carried on her belt, a habit from the days of checking trap lines. She tied one end around a sturdy frozen larch root at the edge of the pit. "If you attack me," Galina said, pointing a mittened finger at the tigress, "we all die. You understand?" The tiger sat down. Watching, Galina gripped the rope and lowered herself over the edge. Her boots scrambled for purchase on the ice. She slid the last 3 feet, landing with a thud in the soft snow next to the cub. It was freezing down here, a pocket of dead air. She scooped the snow away from the cub's face. Its eyes were closed, its whiskers frosted over. She pulled off her heavy mitten and pressed her bare hand against the cub's chest. A faint, fluttery beat. Alive, she gasped. You're alive. She needed to get him out, but she couldn't climb the rope carrying 40 pounds of dead weight. She looked up. The mother's massive face was peering over the rim, blotting out the purple sky. I have to tie him, Galina shouted up, hoping the tone conveyed the intent. She took off her scarf, risking frostbite on her face, and wrapped it around the cub's chest, creating a makeshift harness. She tied the end of the rope to the scarf. Pull, Galina shouted, waving her arms. You have to pull. She didn't know if the tiger understood physics, but the beast understood the rope was connected to her child. The tiger grabbed the rope in her jaws and backed away. The line went taut. The cub dragged up the icy slope. Galina pushed from below, heaving the small body upward until it crested the lip of the fissure. The mother instantly dropped the rope and began frantically licking the cub's face, purring so loudly it sounded like a diesel engine. Galina smiled, exhaustion washing over her. Good mama, she whispered. Then, the realization hit her. The rope was up there. Galina was down here. She reached for the slick wall. Her hand slipped. She looked up at the ledge, 8 feet above. The rope lay in a tangle near the tiger's paws, out of reach. The cold was seeping into her bones now. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the lethargy of hypothermia. She was trapped in the pit, miles from home, with a tiger and a freezing cub. Hey, she yelled, her voice raspy. Hey, I need help too. The tiger stopped licking the cub. She looked down at Galina. The golden eyes narrowed. For the first time, the tiger bared her teeth. Galina froze, her hand halfway to the icy wall. The tiger wasn't looking at her. The amber gaze was fixed on something directly behind the lip of the fissure, something Galina couldn't see from her vantage point in the hole. The growl that ripped from the tigress's throat was not the gentle chuff of a mother. It was a tectonic rumble of pure violence. She swiped at the air, her claws extending like switchblades, catching the faint light of the polar moon. Then, a shadow lunged. A gray blur slammed into the tigress, knocking her back from the edge. Galina gasped as snow showered down on her head. The sounds of a chaotic, snarling struggle erupted from above, the sickening crunch of jaws snapping shut, the heavy thuds of bodies colliding with permafrost. Wolves. It was a pack. They must have been tracking the injured cub for miles, waiting for the mother to be distracted or weakened. Now, with the cub exposed and the mother exhausted, they had made their move. No! Galina screamed, though she knew her voice was useless against the cacophony of the kill. Suddenly, a dark shape was flung over the edge of the pit. It wasn't the tiger. It was a massive timber wolf. Its flank torn open, it hit the bottom of the pit with a wet thud, just feet from the shivering cub. The wolf scrambled up, dazed. It shook its head, spraying blood on the pristine white snow. Then, it locked eyes with the cub. The predator's instinct overrode its pain. It snarled, baring yellowed fangs, and crouched to spring at the helpless ball of fur. Galina didn't think. She didn't have time to be an old woman. She was a force of nature. She ripped the TOZ, 3-4 shotgun from her back. The movement was clumsy in her heavy coat, but adrenaline greased the gears. As the wolf launched itself through the air, Galina swung the heavy walnut stock of the gun like a baseball bat. Crack. The wood connected with the wolf's skull in mid-air, diverting its trajectory. The beast crashed into the ice wall, yelping. It scrambled to turn on her, its eyes wild with pain and rage. Galina racked the slide, but her mittens were too thick to find the trigger guard quickly. The wolf lunged for her throat. She threw her left arm up. The wolf's jaws clamped down on her forearm. The reindeer hide of her coat held, but the pressure was crushing. She felt the bruise forming instantly, the bone groaning under the strain. Galina roared a primal sound that matched the beast's above. She jammed the barrel of the shotgun into the wolf's belly and managed to hook her thumb onto the trigger. Boom! The sound was deafening in the confined space of the pit. The recoil nearly dislocated her shoulder. The wolf went limp, dropping away from her arm like a sack of stones. Silence returned to the pit, ringing in Galina's ears. Above, the fighting had stopped. Galina looked up, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Her arm throbbed with a dull, sickening heat. Had she killed the pack? Or had the pack killed the mother? A massive head appeared over the rim. It was the tigress. Her left ear was torn, bleeding sluggishly, and there was a new gash on her shoulder, but her eyes were clear. She looked down at the dead wolf, then at Galina, then at her cub. The cub let out a weak mewl. The tigress disappeared for a second. Galina's heart sank. She's leaving us, but the tiger returned. In her jaws, she held the thick, knotted root of a dwarf pine she had ripped from the frozen earth, the rope still tangled around it. She dropped the root over the edge. It dangled 3 feet above the ground. Clever girl. Galina wept, tears freezing on her cheeks. She grabbed the cub, shoving him inside her coat, zipping it up until only his nose poked out. He was freezing, his claws digging into her sweater, but the heat of her body was his only chance. Galina jumped, grabbing the rope. Her old joints screamed. She walked her feet up the vertical ice wall, hauling her weight and the cub's weight with arms that felt like lead. She crested the top and collapsed into the snow. The tigress was there, nudging her violently with her nose. "Get up. We are not safe." Galina forced herself to stand. The landscape was littered with 3 dead wolves. The rest of the pack had fled, but the temperature was dropping. The sky had turned a bruised black. The purga, the blizzard, was coming. The walk back was a hallucination. Galina didn't remember much of it. She remembered the rhythmic swaying of the tiger's tail ahead of her, a hypnotic beacon in the swirling white. She remembered talking to Victor, telling him she was sorry for being late for dinner. She remembered the cub shifting against her chest, a small furnace of life keeping her heart from stopping. Twice, Galina fell. Twice, the massive tigress circled back, gripping Galina's coat sleeve gently with her teeth and pulling until she stood again. The predator had become the shepherd. When the outline of the cabin finally materialized through the driving snow, it looked like a tombstone. Galina stumbled to the door, her fingers too frozen to work the latch. She had to use both hands to turn the key, crying out in frustration. The door swung open. Warmth rushed out, the smell of stale tea and birchwood. Galina fell inside. Buran, the dog, was barking frantically. She crawled to the stove, throwing a log in with shaking hands. Then she realized the door was still open. She looked back. The tigress was standing on the threshold, snow piling up on her back. She looked at the warm interior, then at the dark, deadly forest behind her. She looked at the bulge in Galina's coat, where her cub was. She wouldn't come in. She was a wild thing. To enter was to surrender. "Come," Galina rasped, patting the floorboards. "Die out there. Or live in here. Choose." The wind howled, a banshee scream that shook the cabin's timbers. The tigress lowered her head. She took one step, then another. She entered the human world. The scene inside the cabin that night was something that defied every law of nature. On the rug near the cast-iron stove, a massive Siberian tiger lay curled in a crescent shape. Tucked into the curve of her belly was the cub, now dry and nursing contentedly. And sitting in the armchair 3 feet away, holding a mug of tea with trembling hands, was Galina. Buran, the fearless Caucasian shepherd, had compromised by retreating to the bedroom and hiding under the bed frame, refusing to emerge even for sausages. Galina watched the rise and fall of the tigress's flank. The beast was asleep, or seemed to be. The heat of the room had thawed the ice from her whiskers, leaving her coat glistening and vibrant orange against the drab wooden floor. If anyone saw this, Victor, Galina whispered to the empty air. They would commit me to the asylum in Yakutsk. She reached out, her hand hovering over the tiger's shoulder. She wanted to touch that power, to verify it was real. The tiger's ear swiveled toward her hand like a radar dish. One golden eye opened. It wasn't a look of threat. It was an acknowledgement. "I see you. We are at truce." Galina retracted her hand. "Sleep," she said softly. "The storm will break by morning." She didn't sleep that night. She sat guard, the shotgun across her lap. Not because she feared the tiger, but because she feared the world outside that had tried to kill them all. When dawn broke, The silence returned. The purga had passed, leaving the world scoured clean and buried under 2 feet of fresh powder. The tigress stood up, stretching her massive frame. She nudged the cub, who tumbled around her paws, energized and clumsy. She walked to the door and looked at Galina. Galina opened it. The cold rushed in, sharp and cleansing. The sun was a pale coin on the horizon. The tigress stepped out. She didn't look back. There was no sentimental pause, no Disney movie nod of gratitude. She was a queen, returning to her kingdom. She trotted toward the tree line, the cub bounding after her in her massive footprints. Just before they vanished into the pines, the tigress stopped. She let out one single, resonant roar, a sound that shook the snow from the branches of the nearby trees. It was a claim, a warning to the forest. I am here. And then they were gone. 3 years later, the helicopter descended into the clearing, kicking up a whirlwind of snow. The markings on the side read, Global Geo Survey. A man in a heavy red parka jumped out, ducking under the rotors. This was Thomas Reed, a British wildlife journalist and researcher who had spent the last decade documenting the declining population of the Amur tiger. He had heard rumors in the village of Tomtor, whispers of a Baba Yaga who lived alone in the woods and commanded the beasts. He didn't believe in fairy tales. He believed in data. He knocked on the cabin door. Galina Petrovna, now 77 and looking more like a dried apple doll than a human, opened the door. She looked at the Westerner with suspicion. Water? She asked in Russian. Talk, Thomas replied in broken Russian. I am here about the tigers. Galina scoffed and tried to close the door. Thomas jammed his boot in the jamb. Please, he said. The villagers say you have protection. I need to know if the population is recovering. Galina stared at him for a long moment, then stepped back. Tea. Then you go. As Thomas sat in her kitchen, he noticed the strange decor. It wasn't just the usual Orthodox icons on the wall. Above the fireplace, mounted with care, was a large, jagged piece of birch bark. Scratched deep into the wood were 3 parallel gouges, claw marks, massive ones. Where did you get that? Thomas asked, pointing. A gift, Galina muttered. Mrs. Petrovna, Thomas pressed. It is scientifically impossible for a tiger to coexist in this proximity to a human settlement without conflict. If there is a tiger here, it is a danger to you. Galina laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. Come. She led him to the back of the cabin, to the woodshed. Thomas stopped dead. Piled neatly by the door were carcasses, a young elk, 2 wild boars. They were frozen solid, preserved by the cold. But they hadn't been shot. Their necks had been broken, their throats torn with surgical precision. I haven't hunted in 2 years, Galina said, lighting a cigarette. My hands. Arthritis. I cannot hold the gun. Thomas stared at the meat. Then who? She brings it, Galina said simply. Usually in the deep winter. When the snow is too deep for me to walk to the village. The mother? No. Galina smiled, her eyes crinkling. The mother died last winter. I found her by the river. Old age. She pointed a crooked finger toward the dense forest. This is the son. The one I pulled from the pit. He remembers. Thomas Reed stood in the freezing air, his scientific skepticism crumbling before the undeniable reality of the frozen elk. He realized then that he wasn't looking at data. He was looking at a debt being paid. A life for a life. The twist. Thomas stayed for 2 days. He set up camera traps around the perimeter of the cabin, desperate for proof. On the second night, the motion sensors triggered. Thomas and Galina huddled around his laptop screen. The grainy night vision footage showed the clearing. A massive male tiger, far larger than average, emerged from the shadows. He walked with a distinctive limp, an old injury, perhaps from a fall as a cub. He walked up to the porch. He sniffed the door handle. Then, the tiger did something that made Thomas Reed's blood run cold. The great beast turned and looked directly into the camera lens. He didn't attack it. He sat down, his back to the cabin door, facing outward toward the dark forest. He wasn't hunting. He was guarding. Thomas zoomed in. On the tiger's neck, Barely visible under the thick fur was a faint, white scar, a ring around his chest. The scar left by a wool scarf, tied too tight, years ago. He is not a pet, Galena whispered, looking at the screen. He is family. Thomas Reed published his article in National Geographic 6 months later. He didn't reveal the location of the cabin. In his final draft, he wrote, "We search for monsters in the dark, expecting teeth and claws. But sometimes, in the coldest places on earth, we find that the wildest things are the ones that remember kindness. The king of the taiga has a name, but it is not one we are allowed to know. He belongs to Galena." Galena lived to be 82. When she passed, the villagers found her peacefully in her bed. The fire was out, but the cabin wasn't cold. Curled around the small wooden house, pressed against the walls to provide insulation from the wind, were the impressions of massive bodies in the snow. They had stayed with her until the very end, keeping the cold away one last time. In Yakutia, they say the wind doesn't howl anymore near Tomtor. It purrs. If this story froze your heart and melted it all over again, hit that like button. Do you think animals truly remember who saved them? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more incredible survival stories from the edge of the world, subscribe and ring the bell. You don't want to miss what's coming next.